It's Halloween. For us horror fans, it's the most anticipated time of the year. It's when we embrace all sorts of spooky silliness and frightful follies. Decorating the house, binging on horror films, and putting together costumes is what Halloween is all about. Remember those cool costume catalogs that would come in the mail every year? Man, going through them and seeing all the new costumes that they had in stock was the best. But for fans of horror video games, Halloween is mostly the same thing, actually. The only difference is that we play scary games. I mean, sure, horror games can be played all year round. That's what I do with them. But playing horror games during Halloween is special. It's a matter of being festive about it, damn it. And seeing as I'm an adult now, mostly, I found that gaming is the easiest way to recapture that childhood glee I had whenever October came by. So this year, I set up a little bit of a treat for all of you. I've set aside a handful of horror games I've never played before and was only familiar with on a superficial level. And I'm passing on my experiences with them to you! That's right, this video is not one, not two, but 4 reviews in one. It's a spooky scrutiny spectacular. A spooktacular, if you will. A little bit of old, a little bit of new. And it's all part of my 2017 Halloween Horror Extravaganza. Kicking off our list is Dead Secret, a first-person horror adventure game released in 2015 by Robot Invader. Set in 1965 rural Kansas, you play as a reporter determined to learn the truth about the death of a reclusive professor by trespassing on his property and rummaging through his stuff, as reporters are wont to do, of course. As far as adventure games go, Dead Secret is pretty standard fare. Find items, combine them to make other items, use them to open doors or other items, collect information about your surroundings, finish the game. In that sense, Dead Secret does a pretty great job of doing what it sets out to do. It doesn't try to be anything more than an adventure game. It's straightforward and it's to the point, and by focusing on just doing that, it delivers a great experience. It's short. It's the shortest game on the list, in fact, but the almost 2-hour length is more than made up for by the fact that it has plenty of tension and suspense around each and every corner. Especially because you're not the only person inside of that house. Dead Secret isn't a game that will make you jump out of your seat, but it's a game that will keep you guessing as to who the murderer is right until the end. The house has many secrets in it. Some are obvious, some you'll need to go out of your way to discover. But all in all, it's a paranormal murder mystery with just enough meat on its bones to keep you creeped out while you try and piece together the game's lingering questions. Oh, and what lingering questions does it have? As a good murder mystery, Dead Secret is dead on the money. It does a great job of building up the feeling of dread by playing up the fact that there's a killer on the loose looking to silence you as you slowly begin to unravel who their identity is. The game delivers this great feeling of fear upon entering certain rooms of the house because you have no idea if the killer is going to be waiting for you there on your first run through, and it's handled really, really well. The narrative of Dead Secret is easily one of its greatest strengths, if not the greatest strength. Now that being said, it's not the scariest game I've played, as I've sort of mentioned before. Tense? Sure. Great atmosphere? Absolutely. Horrifying? Not really. It uses the situation of the game's location and its backstory to deliver on its frightful story, rather than relying on creepy visions and scary monsters. It's not one of my favorite adventure games either, since it lacked the sort of magic that something like I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream did. However, Dead Secret is gripping enough to make you want to uncover every inch of the professor's house and discover what the hell happened there. And it got me interested enough in Robot Invader to check out what other projects they might have in the future. This game was really creative and I'd love to see what else they can do. While it's designed to be a VR experience, and it's pretty obvious when you jump in and play around with how the game controls, it functions just fine on your standard actual reality setup. And the fact that this is all done from a first-person perspective does a lot to drive home the sense of abandonment and isolation, all while increasing the level of terror whenever the game triggers those scripted sequences where the killer closes down on you and does what murderers do to pesky reporters trying to uncover their identities. Dead Secret is as bizarre as it is suspenseful, and the fact that it never lets up on that constant tension that it builds up so well ensures that you're in for a thrilling time. Which actually creates a contrast between it and the next game that I played this Halloween season, Stasis. Stasis is also a point-and-click adventure game, but it couldn't feel any more different. If Dead Secret is all about creating short-term, immediate tension, then Stasis is all about building atmosphere for a long period of time. It's like comparing a sprint to a long jog, I guess? Stasis is about as traditional of a point-and-click adventure game as you can get. It's isometric, it's fairly vague overall, requiring you to pay attention to figure out its puzzles. There's nothing too absurd about its logic, but there was more than one instance where that aha moment just refused to stick when I was trying to figure out how to progress. A lot of its narrative is done through environmental storytelling rather than explicit exposition. And it's even filled with a variety of gruesome deaths awaiting the clumsy gamer to stumble upon. Developed by the Brotherhood and also a 2015 release, Stasis takes its horrors out into the cold and empty vacuum of space. You play a man who wakes up from stasis, on a mysterious space station called the Groomlake, searching for his missing wife and child. Being a sci-fi horror game, of course, there are some funky, morally reprehensible experiments going on that's largely responsible for the deaths of almost everyone on the station, because it wouldn't be a proper sci-fi horror game if there wasn't. But beyond even just being a plot device, the game uses that cliched plot hook to really do a number with its environments and its environmental storytelling. It's oozing with signs of a disaster gone awry, or actually several disasters, as over the course of the game it's revealed that the crew undertook a handful of extreme measures trying to contain that primary disaster. And those disasters are shown prominently over every inch of the Groomlake. Empty rooms, save for the corpses inside of them, blood-stained walls, grimy computer monitors, broken machinery. All signs point to a helpless situation for both the crew, whose fate you slowly learn about by reading their discarded log entries, and for the game's protagonist. After all, how long can you last in a station that's been overrun by... well, you'll see if you play it. Stasis' story is more than sufficiently foreboding and can get incredibly dark at times. Themes of genetic mutation, corporate greed, human experimentation, and even madness all pop up in one form or another as the plot unfolds. Some scenes in particular get about as disturbing as you can get in a video game. If not visually, then certainly thematically. So if you're looking to play something both chilling and reminiscent of the adventure games of yore, Stasis may just be what you're looking for. Just be ready to do a lot of reading. Those logs and those computer entries are pretty integral to getting the full meat of the game's horror. And that's actually a common theme between Stasis and the second game by the Brotherhood that I played this year, Cayne.
It's Cayne!
It was released earlier this year, actually, back in January. Once more, it's totally free. No, not just for a limited amount of time or as a special promotion or anything, it's just free. So if this game looks like it's right up your alley, head on over to GOG or Steam and grab it. Or get both. Who's stopping you? I'm certainly not. Cayne shares a universe with Stasis. In fact, it's actually a sequel that, as far as I can tell, takes place in the exact same space station as the first game. However, the only real threads that connect the two titles is that the experiments that were done in Stasis directly set up the whos and whys of Cayne, though the sequel takes them in a bit of a different direction. Sure, the human experimentation is still there, but the end purpose to it has been co-opted by a particularly sinister cult of personality for a long-dead enigmatic figure. It supplanted the concept of playing God with the use of science to actually reincarnate a person. The doubling down of the mystery building and the heavy dose of religious imagery throughout this game is a weird offshoot of the mad science of Stasis, but I do love it. As a continuation of Stasis, Cayne is a remarkable improvement technically. I have no idea if it's running on a different engine or not, but it does a whole slew of things better. Graphics are better, with higher resolution sprites and better detailed environments. The overall gameplay is smoother, as it seems to run even better than the previous title. The UI is more intuitive, with better inventory management and better handling of how messages are read. And that last part is particularly important, because just like the first game, reading the logs is key to understanding the plot, as well as solving more than just one puzzle. On a narrative level, it manages to deliver a pretty good story in a very, very short time. I'm actually impressed with the level of character development the devs have managed to squeeze out of a game that's roughly 2 hours long. Keep in mind that with this game, you get what you pay for. I mentioned it's free, right? It's a very short game that, while very well crafted, is sure to feel dissatisfying for anyone looking for a much deeper experience. Even as a follow-up to Stasis, it leaves a little bit to be desired. More questions are raised than answers given, and nothing is really resolved by the game's end. Sure, the game has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The story wraps up, but there's a lot of questions left lingering in the background that I really wanted a few answers to. Like, I'm all for vague endings and fan theories and puzzling over different interpretations of events, but I'm struggling to even make sense of what happened using the game's logic itself. It's one of those games, and I think that hinders the experience just a little bit. But considering the only thing that I lost on Cayne was my time, I have very little to complain about here. Alright, Lone Survivor, this game right here is it. This game is among the best horror indie games that I've ever played. It's become one of my favorites of the genre. I'm putting Lone Survivor among stuff like Amnesia and Outlast, and just to give you some context, I've cited Outlast as one of my favorite horror games ever. So to come out of nowhere and win me over like that, you've got to be doing something right. Lone Survivor is a game that shamelessly demonstrates just how much Jasper Byrne loves Silent Hill. Not that he really needed to after recreating Silent Hill as an NES-inspired retro remake called Soundless Mountain 2. I see what you did there. In fact, Lone Survivor is pretty much what you would get had Silent Hill been made for the Super Nintendo in terms of fidelity. But it also goes beyond your typical survival horror fare and incorporates some elements from actual survival games, like the scavenging for food and the ability to cook it to increase its benefits for you. Or sleeping in your bed to save your game. It covers up its mechanics with in-game rationality so well that it's easy to overlook the fact that it's all merely window dressing. For instance, at one point you're given a handheld gaming console that you can use to escape the horrors of your surroundings, but it will cost you a single battery. These same batteries are used to power up your flashlight, meaning that you have to make the conscious decision on whether or not you want to play video games or to be able to see in the dark. Now that makes sense in the game world, but mechanically, all that playing that video game does is manipulate an invisible variable that may or may not affect the game's ending. There's no real survival element to it. You don't die from starvation from not eating food. You don't get mauled to death in the darkness for not having a light. But factors like that do affect what sort of ending you might get based on the actions that you take in-game. It's actually a very similar thing that Silent Hill does, except that I found that Lone Survivor manages to pull it off in a slightly more organic manner. And as an homage to Silent Hill, Lone Survivor is excellent. All the elements that you'd expect to find in a proper Silent Hill game are present. A protagonist whose mental grip of the world is shaky at best, a de-emphasis on combat with it negatively affecting your endgame rating, multiple endings based on that endgame rating, which itself is manipulated by what the character does over the course of the game, heavy usage of metaphor, including other characters who may or may not actually be real, unnamed side quests that are insinuated but not really revealed, mirrors being used to fast travel, specifically referencing Silent Hill Origins. Hell, it even uses the exact same map elements and sound effects when picking up items. This is a Silent Hill game. This game is Silent Hill. It's Silent Hill. Okay, it's Silent Hill. Even beyond the fact that it's a Silent Hill demake, and that much of its drawing power comes from the fact that it's a Silent Hill demake, it's still a pretty great survival horror game in its own right. It manages to be magnificently creepy, and does so in a retro-inspired way that I find immensely appealing. The level of immersion that this game offers is sublime. Aside from the masterfully done audio design that accompanies the atmosphere perfectly, the setting itself is deliciously unsettling and colored with such a feeling of despair, I was shocked that a 2D pixel art game was able to pull it off. It's hard to do horror well on a flat plane since the claustrophobia that one feels when crawling through darkness doesn't quite feel as strangling. Enemies appearing off screen can still be used to create an effective scare, but it just doesn't feel as immediate as a game that uses 3 dimensions. That's why I think Lone Survivor is remarkable, because while it still doesn't have the same level of punch that turning a corner and running into the arms of a zombie in any Resident Evil game does, Lone Survivor still manages to keep you on your toes very effectively. The only thing, and I mean the only thing that I wish Lone Survivor would have done differently was to just have more game. There's a director's cut version, which is the one that you get standard if you were to go out and buy it right now, and I really think that you should. And while I appreciate that it adds a bunch more items and endings and new areas, I still wish this game had more game to it. This game is so well done that if the developer had fleshed out the city a little more, or added maybe another building or two to explore, I don't think that the game would have overstayed its welcome. If there's only a single recommendation that I would make this season to check out during the obligatory Halloween sale of your retailer of choice, it would have to be to get Lone Survivor. Don't get me wrong, all the games that I talked about on this list were pretty great and I would recommend them all. But Lone Survivor is one that, in my opinion, leads the pack by a country mile. The only question that remains is whether or not it will continue to do so against whatever games I manage to scrounge up for next year's Halloween Horror Extravaganza.